Okay, thank you. Again, thank you for joining the Equity Workforce Planning and Capacity Grants webinar. Before we get started, I would like to introduce myself and the rest of the team from Mass CEC. I'm Camila Bacolod and I'm the program coordinator on the workforce development team here at Mass CEC. And I'll pass it off to Edward for introductions.
Hi, I'm Edward Shea. I'm the Program Director for Adult Training and MWB Support at MassCC. I will pass it off to Anitra.
Thanks, Edward. Hi, all. Anitra Ford, Program Manager for the Workforce Equity Team. I'll pass it on to Ben.
It's Anitra. Ben Christian is the Program Manager on the Equity Team, and I'll pass it to Heather.
Hi, I'm Heather Marciniak, also a Program Manager on the Workforce Equity Team, and I'll pass it to Bethany.
Hi, I'm Bethany Costanzo. I'm a Workforce Environmental Justice Fellow, and I'll pass it to the other fellow, Dylan.
Hi, I'm Dylan Lanzadesio, and I'm the other Workforce Environmental Justice Fellow. And I think that's everyone on our team that's here.
Okay. Yeah, thank you all for doing the introductions. So next slide, please. So the agenda for today is that we will give a brief background on the planning capacity grants, including the funding source, the target populations and sectors that we're targeting with this funding. And then we will go over the eligibility and the application process and timeline. And then we will speak more about the planning and capacity grants scopes. We just want to note that we did hold a webinar last year about the planning and capacity grants, and we are hosting this webinar because we've then added additional scopes to the planning capacity grants RFP, and we will talk more about that during the meeting. And again, we will hold sessions for questions and answers throughout the webinar. So we have 2 time slots for Q&A. So you can put your questions in the chat if anything pops up while we're presenting, and then we will answer that during the Q&A sessions. So to give a brief background on the funding source for the planning and capacity grants, in 2021, the Massachusetts legislature passed the act creating a next generation roadmap for climate policy to set aggressive net zero emissions goals for 2050. So with this act, the legislature set aside $12 million annually to expand workforce development efforts for Mass CEC to support individuals that will be most impacted by climate change and the transition to the clean energy sector. So in the next slide, I will go over the target populations and the sectors that we will be targeting under this act and the funding opportunities that resulted from it. So the target populations for the planning capacity grants are individuals residing in environmental justice neighborhoods. So you can read more about the definition and also view a map of the different EJ neighborhoods in Massachusetts by scanning the QR code on the slide and going to the bit.ly link underneath. With this grant, we are also supporting members of federally recognized or state acknowledged tribes, members of underrepresented communities in the clean energy workforce, and current or former workers from the fossil fuel industry that are trying to transition into the clean energy sector. We are also targeting minority and women-owned business enterprises, which are businesses are 51% owned and dominantly controlled by minority and women principals. So the type of support that MWBEs may need includes getting certification where they might need assistance in that process. And we're also aiming to provide support for these businesses to officially create a business entity that would then be able to gain certifications once they're established. We also support early stage startups with minority founders in executive roles. So these are the type of MWBs that we're trying to support with these grants. And the goal of supporting the individuals and these MWBs are we hope that these MWBEs will eventually hire the individuals that will be trained in the training programs for clean energy occupations once they have the resources and are fully established in the field. So Mass CEC has four climate critical sector focus areas. So one is the net zero grid focus area, which aims to modernize our grid to be supported by the oncoming renewable energy resources. We also have the high performance building focus area, that aims to electrify and decarbonize our buildings. We also support the offshore wind industry, ensuring that we have a sufficient workforce for the ongoing offshore wind development in the state, and also to ensure that we have the supply chain in place to support the offshore wind industry. And lastly, we also support the development and access to clean energy transportation technologies, which includes electric vehicles, increasing access to electric vehicle chargers, and yeah, also increasing access to e-bikes in the state. These are some examples of priority occupations within the climate critical sectors. So electricians and solar installers are needed to support the solar development in the state. Solar installers will need to be registered electricians in Massachusetts. So there will be a high demand of electricians in the state in order to meet our net zero emission goals. And another example is the construction trades, which are needed in across the clean energy sectors and multiple fields. Energy analysts and HERS readers are also needed to evaluate the building energy efficiency to decarbonize buildings. Customer service representatives are also needed to work with individuals in the state to support the adoption of clean energy technologies as we increase the incentives for those clean energy technologies in the state. Installation workers will also be needed to weatherize old buildings specifically and insulate the buildings and update the mechanical systems. HVAC technicians will be needed to install heat pumps and other weatherization technologies that will be in high demand. Lines installers and repairers will also be in high demand with a drastic increase in electricity usage in the future. EV technicians will also be in demand in various auto repair shops as knowledge of maintaining and repairing EVs will be needed in the future, and also more specifically as we convert more medium and heavy duty fleets to electrical vehicles. Okay. And these are some examples of MWBEs within the climate critical sectors, which includes electrical contractors and clean tech startups with minority founders, retrofit consultant companies that are minority and women owned. Also, HVAC contractors will be in demand to further decarbonize our buildings, as well as general contractors and engineering consultants will need to access the procurement pipelines that will be in the line as we build our clean energy infrastructure. Solar and other types of MWBs are solar installers and EV car share companies. And these are all of the grant opportunities that we are currently offering. Again, in this webinar, we will be talking about the equity workforce planning and capacity grants and the additional scopes that we've included in this RFP. And we will talk more about the deadline and the application process for this RFP. We do have a rolling deadline until May 20th. And we also want to note the other funding opportunities are intended to support priority populations, which are the boxes with the blue headers on this page. The equity workforce training equipment and infrastructure offers up to $1.2 million to support individuals from priority populations with career pathway training or career exploration. This funding opportunity offers funds for equipment and infrastructure to support training. Please note that we did extend the deadline for this funding opportunity to May 15th. And we also have the MWBE support grants, which are aimed to address the barriers faced by MWBEs in the clean energy sector. We have also extended the deadline for this opportunity to April 26. And then we have the climate critical workforce training, equipment and infrastructure grants, which is open to all Massachusetts residents and incumbent workers. This opportunity provides up to $800,000 to support Massachusetts residents with career pathway training or incumbent workers with upskilling. And this funding opportunity also offers equipment and infrastructure funding to support training. This deadline is also extended to May 15th. So the rest of the presentation will go over the equity workforce planning capacity grants RFP. You can scan the QR code here and go to the bit.ly link to read the RFP documents and learn more information. So we have 894,422 total available funding under this RFP. And these grants are intended to develop an implementation plan or add key capacity for programming in order to expand access to career and business opportunities in climate critical fields for the target populations that I've mentioned earlier. And we will talk more about the additional scopes later in this presentation. So organizations are eligible to apply for this grant include community-based organizations, post-secondary educational institutions, for-profit entities such as training companies, trade associations and unions or other coalitions. Federally recognized and state-acknowledged tribes are also eligible to apply, as well as workforce development organizations, and workforce investment boards or mass hire organizations. Additional criteria includes that the lead applicant must have a Massachusetts-based office or staffing, and they must be able to submit a certificate of good standing from the Massachusetts Department of Revenue. So these are the eligible lead applicants. We do highly encourage partnerships when you submit an application to ensure that you have a comprehensive proposal um, in order to execute the plan that is presented in your application. But one party should take on the role of leading the application team, which would be the lead applicant. Uh, This is an example of an applicant partnership that we hope to see in the applications. So applicant partnerships may include a social service, community-based organization, a career center, also include employer partners, a community college or another educational institution, and a workforce development nonprofit organization. And these organizations together can present a comprehensive proposal that where each organization is responsible, for example, for recruiting, providing wraparound social support services, retention services, placement support into jobs, and also provide that technical training that is needed for the specific clean energy occupation. For the planning and capacity grants, there is opportunity to finalize these kind of partnerships in order to then present a comprehensive proposal or add capacity for your existing programming. Okay, now we will open it up for Q&A. Again, you can put your questions in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask questions. So we will give it a couple of minutes for the attendees to think of some questions. If there aren't any questions now, we do have another Q&A session after we go over the details of the planning and capacity grants. So you may ask your questions then. Okay, I will now hand it off to Ben to go over the general application process.
Thank you, Camilla. So I'll be talking about the general application process and the timeline. So if you go to the next slide, we have just a general application process. So you have to review the RFP and all the forms and attachments to understand the opportunity requirement and our objectives here at Mass CEC. What you're doing now is the kind of orange box where you're attending the informational webinar. We will also have office hours and other ways for you to gather information and resources to submit a successful application. If required, you feel free to contact us with any questions that you have at our RFP-specific inbox at rfpworkforce@masscec.com. Once you've completed all those kind of steps and are ready to submit your completed application, you can do so by the deadline of 11:59 p.m. on the 28th of May to our RFP Workforce inbox. Please use the Equity Workforce Planning Capacity grant application in your subject line. Next slide, please. So the application packet will include several attachments. The main takeaways here are for attachment 3, which is the budget milestones and deliverables attachment that will be submitted in an Excel file. It has multiple tabs, so please make sure that you complete all of the tabs on that Excel sheet. We do require 2 MOUs or letters of support, so please include those with attachment 2, or they can be separate documents. Other than what is required, additional attachments will not be considered during review or scoring to ensure equity in our review. Next slide, please. These are just the important dates to consider. So we are doing a second pre-application webinar today. We've done one in the fall. We will have 3 upcoming pre-application office hours where you can come, drop in, drop out to either ask questions about a concept, or if you have kind of specific questions about how to submit the application, or if you're just looking to network and find additional opportunities for partnership for an application, this would be a great time for you to do that. So we have these upcoming dates. If you go to the landing page for the RFP, you will find links to pre-register for those. But again, you do not need to stay for the whole hour. Once you come in and your question is answered and you're satisfied, feel free to drop out. And again, that leads to the proposal due date of May 20th at 11:59 p.m. And for notification of award, please expect a 6 to 8 week turnaround after submission. Next slide, please. On page 18 of the RFP, you'll find the selection criteria for all the strands. So we'll be looking firstly at applicant and partner experience and qualifications. So as Camila said, that we are looking for partnerships and for folks to lean on their strengths and find partners that can help fill gaps where they aren't as strong. So please be aware of that and to communicate that clearly in the application. Also, we'll be looking and scoring on the target occupations, businesses, and the populations that you will be serving to ensure that they meet the high need climate critical positions outlined earlier in this presentation, as well as the populations that we're looking to serve with these funds. What is the strength of the initial plan or concept, or the capacity building opportunity that you're looking to fund? Your commitment to maximizing partnerships to expand your concept as you move towards a full implementation project, and your willingness to work with Mass CEC and your dedicated technical assistance provider. And then lastly, the diversity of approaches. Is this new and innovative? Is this an area of need that isn't currently being addressed by any current grantees of Mass CEC, or in a specific geographic area that is underserved? These are other areas that we will take into consideration with scoring. Next slide, please. So activities that are not eligible for funding include any costs associated with preparing this application, the purchase or lease of any venue space intended for the general operating purposes of an organization, or activities that occur before or following the term of an awarded grant. And we'll just pause here quickly if there are any questions that have arisen so far during the presentation.
I had a question.
Yes.
You said that funding couldn't be used for the lease or purchase of the building. Could it be used for the sort of planning of, for example, like a sustainability hub? Could money be used for like the planning and research around a sustainability hub?
Yes, you could. It's the planning phase. So if you're doing the research on, what the cost would be and what would be necessary to secure the funding in order to make that capital investment during this planning phase, you could use funds to plan that out as part of a larger programming.
Okay, thank you.
Just to put a finer point on what Ben said, though, you couldn't just plan just to build a sustainability hub. There has to be a workforce element to the plan.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mhm.
So if the plan is to build out training around that sustainability hub, that would be applicable. But if you're just designing a sustainability hub and not doing any additional training design or anything like that, that would not apply for this.
Okay, thank you.
So there'll be one more opportunity for questions and answers as we get towards the end and after we go through the scope. So I will now pass it off to Anitra to talk about the programming scopes outlined in this RFP.
Thanks, Ben. So before we delve into the individual scopes, I'd just like to use this slide to give you a very quick overview of the different scopes that are new to this RFP. The first scope is the planning and capacity project leading to implementation or pilot. This is historically was the main scope of this RFP previous to adding the additional 2 scopes. The second scope is for additional participant support services for equity-focused workforce implementation projects. It's important to know that this scope is for existing training programs. It's not necessarily for a new one. And then scope 3, professional development for clean energy employers to increase equitable and inclusive hiring practices. It's also important to note that this scope is to design a system of delivery rather than just implement a training. And so with the next couple of slides, I'm going to go into detail regarding scope 1. For scope 1, the planning or capacity project leading to implementation or pilot, the planning award range would be from $20,000 to $50,000. The duration of this award would be 6 months to 1 year. For capacity, the award range will be from $30,000 to $150,000, and the duration will be from 1 to 2 years. Please note that any planning requests over $30,000 will require substantiation for the need above that amount. For these planning and capacity opportunities, match is not required, however, always encouraged. Designed to prepare applicants for full implementation via comprehensive planning process. Full implementation is not necessary to achieve the program goals. However, capacity grants may instead result in a pilot. For capacity building, this may include hiring staff and or developing curriculum and is supported by Mass CEC technical assistance throughout the process. Eligible funding examples for planning grants is to identify partners for support services, to clarify curricular resources, to plan for implementation schedule or programming, and to plan for staff time devoted to program planning. For the capacity, eligible funding uses would be curriculum development to expand existing programming, equipment and supplies for training, and staff time devoted to capacity building. And this is where you would have the opportunity to run a pilot cohort to test your program design. Programming strands under scopes 1 and 2. I'm going to allow Heather to talk more about that after she gives her presentation on scope 2, but this is just kind of an idea that once you've decided whether or not you would be applying under scopes 1 or 2, you would then need to decide on which strand you would further apply for. Strand A will be for career planning, career training leading to employment in critical climate critical priority occupations. Strand B is clean energy, career awareness, exploration, and preparedness programs. And Strand C is business support services leading to the creation of expansion of MWBEs in climate critical fields. And now I'm just going to pass it on to Heather for scope 2.
Thanks, Anitra. We can go to the next slide. So as Anitra just mentioned, and Camille also reviewed earlier in the presentation, we do have an additional scope for participant support services. Scope 2 will fund up to $150,000 for up to 3 years award for existing equity-focused workforce implementation projects. So the intention of this funding is to support addressing gaps in your current support services. An example might be driver's license training that you now know you need, but wasn't included in your original budget. And I will go into that example in more detail in a moment. Just want to highlight that applications requesting funding for underrepresented populations that face greater barriers, for example, returning citizens, single mothers, victims of domestic violence or abuse, are strongly encouraged to apply. Next slide. So here's the example that I just referenced. In scenario 1 here, a Mass EC grantee during program implementation realizes that their employer partners are requesting, requiring employees to have driver's license for HERS raters positions. So the grantee is going to apply for additional participant support services, specifically around driver's license education and the costs associated with receiving and obtaining a license. In the second example, a community college is already implementing a successful program training HVAC technicians. However, they've documented over a number of cohorts that there's a significant upward trend in the number of single mother trainees. So they want to apply for additional participant support services, in this case, childcare supports and stipends. Because this is a new applicant, they would want to be able to demonstrate, you'd want to be able to demonstrate the success of your current workforce program. One way that you would need to do that would be to include your current tracked outcomes and metrics in your proposal narrative. Next slide. So as Anitra already mentioned, under scopes 1 and 2, Anitra reviewed scope 1, which was planning and capacity projects. I just touched on scope 2, which is requesting additional support service for current program participants. When you are submitting your application, you would still need to include a comprehensive narrative proposal under one of our 3 strands, strand A, B, or C. Strand A would be your current program training, which would be leading to employment in climate critical priority occupations, or strand B, clean energy career awareness, exploration, and preparedness, or strand C, business support services for MWBEs in the climate critical field. Next slide. Now I'm going to pass it back to Ben to review scope 3.
Thank you, Heather. We can go to the next slide. So scope 3 is the professional development for clean energy employers to increase equitable and inclusive hiring practices. So the award range for this new scope is $50,000 to $250,000. The award duration is 1 or 2 years. So the goal is to increase equitable and inclusive hiring of climate critical training program graduates and other individuals from underrepresented populations into the clean energy sector. So from this funding, we would want to see the development of a plan for leadership and for those who are making hiring decisions in firms in the clean energy industry to take trainings around cultural competency, biases in hiring, and to learn about evidence-based approaches to DEI. So we're hoping that targeting those decision makers would lead to then building out a system to incentivize those in leadership positions to gain this crucial knowledge to increase the diversity within the clean energy sector. And just for some examples of potential program designs for this scope include a nonprofit develops a preferred list of professional development service providers and trainers and designs a recruitment pipeline and support system to incentivize owners and leaders at construction companies to utilize the service providers around DEI education. Another could be an industry association works with professional development experts to tailor training and assessment tools focused on cultural competency and identifying hiring biases, and pushes out the new resources to the member businesses within the clean energy sector. So we'll pause here for our final Q&A. I see Linda has a hand raised, so if you want to come off of mute. I'm sorry, Linda, I can't hear you. Feel free to type your question in the chat. Thank you so much. And yes, Tracy in the chat asked, will we be getting the slides? Yes, the slides will be, and the recorded webinar will be on the landing page for this RFP solicitation at the Mass CEC funding website. So Linda is asking, can a community college use Strand A to develop a curriculum for electricians, an identified sector for growth? In the planning phase, curriculum development would be one of the approved, areas for planning. As long as, and then would you be developing kind of what would be then the off ramp, from your program? Would it be into a electrician pre-apprenticeship program, or making sure that you're identifying, what would be the next step, once that curriculum is developed, and what the pathway would be for those participants?
If you need to hire an outside party to develop the curriculum, that could push it into the capacity space as well. So if you have a program design in mind at this stage, but just need technical expertise to grow a curriculum, that would also be applicable under Strand A, under the capacity version of scope.
So if there's no more questions here, but you happen to think of something that comes up, we have one more question.
So generally what we advise applicants and also current grantees is that there's several layers there in terms of having expertise from a technical standpoint, but also, while each applicant may have strength, building in partnerships to cover additional support services. We highly value retention support services because that's a big problem in not just our sector, but every sector out there that's kind of trades driven. So while as a community college, you probably have strong supports in place, they may differ from what's needed for supporting someone training as an electrician, since there's extensive hours of additional on-the-job experience they have to have, and individuals coming from underrepresented populations may need supports during that time frame to persist and then gain their actual employment. Depending on whether, also it depends on whether you're routing them into a union position or a non-union position as a electrician will cause some variance in the level of support they're receiving after their actual technical training. So basically, the long story short is if you need to bring on someone to help design the technical curriculum, that would potentially be capacity. If you need to design those supports, you could still apply for capacity, but then part of the capacity funds would have to be designated towards designing that pipeline that would include the technical training, but also support the placement and then further retention of those individuals if you were planning to come back in and apply for one of our $1 million implementation grants.
Okay, I think we can move on to the next slide. So if you, after leaving today, if you do have additional questions, again, these are the upcoming dates for the 3 office hour sessions that we will have leading up to the May 20th deadline for these RFP solicitation. If you're interested in networking further and being part of our partnership list, you can email workforce@massec.com to get on that. And if you have specific questions about this RFP, again, the email address is rfpworkforce@massec.com for any questions specific to this planning capacity solicitation. Additional funding opportunities that we have, I just wanted to make you aware of quickly before we sign off for the day. Our summer internship program, summer session is open now, which is designed to tap into enthusiastic workforce committed to learning about the clean energy industry, employ students across different majors and training programs. Massey UC reimburses for 12 weeks of an intern's work at a clean energy company, and with the end goal of hoping that some of these interns could then turn into permanent hires. So you can use that QR code to learn more about the internship program that we offer here at Massey UC. And also we have our technical trades work and learning program, which is designed for Voc High School After Dark, CTI students, as well as participations of Massey UC programs are eligible to participate in this. And this program provides valuable paid on-the-job training and work experience in careers in the clean energy sector. And again, these are reimbursed wage reimbursed wage program, and you can find more information on this at the QR code below. So again, thank you for attending today's webinar. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to email us at rfpworkforce@massec.com.
So can we stop the recording?